is AACSCB accredited, and 5 of our engineering colleges are ABET accredited. So we have a lot of international accreditations with us, and with 25,000 students and 800 plus faculty members, and our campuses are located in 8 regions of the country, and we promote the multidisciplinary education through 17 schools. And I am glad today School of Economics, which is one of the schools of the university, is organizing this 5th annual economics conference on crisis, challenges and the way ahead, in collaboration with the Indian Econometric Society, and we are very happy, proud to be associated with this. I'm sure that the conference is a significant contribution to the NIMMS activities and its strategic building blocks of promoting the research, creating teaching excellence, meeting the aspirations of the shareholders, and making sure that we remain the most preferred place of learning in India and soon to be in the globe for our education, and particularly in economics. Like many other institutions, academic institutions in the world, we were confronted with a serious disruption in 2020, and all of us with a great teamwork among the faculty and the staff, we dealt with the situation and made sure that we ensure the continuity of our activities without creating any disruption for our students in their learning, in their career progression. And I'm very happy to report that we have been very successful in ensuring the continuity of all our activities. Well, the experience which we had during these last 2 years, in fact, it is very aptly captured by the theme of the conference, that the crisis and the kind of challenges which we are going to face in the new world, and I think it is very timely, and I feel that we need all bring the knowledge and expertise together, create a strong narrative strengthening our abilities to handle the new situation, and equipping ourselves to deal with the kind of new world which we are going to confront. And I'm sure that the people say that we are approaching to the normal world, but I feel that we are, I think, approaching a very different normal world. Actually, it is something new normal people are saying, and it is rightly so that it is something going to be new normal. Now, how do we do that? I think I feel that one is that we need to develop some very good understanding of the kind of change which has taken place, and what is the kind of an impact it has created. And after developing the good understanding, perhaps we'll be able to develop some good strategies for the future. Also, I think coming together at a global level and putting together the expertise, and we are very fortunate today that Professor Fontana is with us, Viral Acharya is going to be with us, and it is a great coming together of international expertise. And I'm sure that the guidance and the deliberations from their side is going to help us, support us, guide us to understand the new framework condition. And it will also help us to better articulate our needs and creating effectively the narratives for pushing the new mindsets, particularly taking in view that the resilience and agility are going to be two important drivers for us to handle these new challenges. And also I will feel that the discussion will help us to make a purposeful integration of the learnings in our curriculum, in our deliberations, and the students will get a lot of good understanding how to prepare ourselves for the future of work, because that future of work is also going to be very different in times to come. And I see that the conference will contribute to this theme in some interesting ways and meaningful ways. I also feel that the last 2 years of experience have given us a lot of interesting lessons. We need to really understand how to capture that and how to go forward. At my personal end, at the end of the being the top management of the university, NMMS University, I feel that I learned two very important lessons actually, and I would like to share with you, and I hope that you will also find that lessons very interesting for you. First is that I found that in these times you cannot handle this situation it cannot be done by one person. I think it is always now going to be kind of a teamwork approach, and the teamwork is going to play a very important role. And I articulate this teamwork approach in terms of what we call the distributed leadership model actually. So, which is supporting each other, volunteerism, in fact ensured us facing these challenges and changes with least resistance and disruption. And this disruption also put us in a situation where we did not have any rule book or previous experience to address the emerging situation. But we faced these unstructured situations and found out the solution together, working together, looking at the challenges in depth and understanding the process and exploring the ways forward. So this team approach and distributed leadership model, I think I would like to encourage that when we talk about handling the challenges in future, I think it is going to become very important tool for us to deal with the kind of situations which we are going to face in emerging situations. The second learning at my personal end is that we always use this term called VUCA word, volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous word. But we found that I think we started facing the challenges not only on the external VUCA word but also inner VUCA word. I'm sure that most of us had lot of questions, lot of concerns at our personal end. At the same time, we face lot of volatility, uncertainty from the external situations. And I found perhaps there are four attitudes which I think we need to be careful and which can help us to handle this VUCA situation quite effectively. To deal with the volatility, what I found was that responding to this situation makes much more sense than simply reacting. So make sure that when you deal with the volatility, you respond in appropriate manner, doing some in-depth analysis, study, not simply reacting to the situation. I think I figured out that this was perhaps the best way to deal with the volatility. Handling uncertainty, make sure that you do not allow your fears to avoid taking risks. I think if in the emerging situations, risks are going to be quite inherent, we need not to be fearful about that. At least you must make it sure that you do not allow the fear to prevent you or to stop you or to avoid taking risks. Make sure that you keep on taking calculated risks, and after a lot of analysis and study. To address the complexity, ensure that we are able to see and perceive the things with clarity. I think there I tell all my students that whatever you study in the classes, different concepts and different frameworks, they help you to bring a lot of clarity in your way you look at the things, and that is perhaps will bring a lot of resources to you to handle the kind of a complexity situation. And to address the ambiguity issue, I think make sure you spend a lot of time on contemplating and meditation to quiet your mind enough to make meaning to handle the ambiguity. I think it's very, very important in the future that some time we need to set for meditation, contemplation. It's a kind of an cooling down kind of an approach which we need to follow. And I'm sure that if you put your knowledge and skills through these positive attitude tests, you are going to get greatly benefit from these 4 attitude tests. Now the other point I would like to, I just conclude that without going into much detail, I will conclude in a couple of minutes time. The other point which I would like to bring to your notice and all the delegates in the conference is the handling the future and the kind of challenges cannot be done if you are not ESG sensitive. I think we have to be very ESG sensitive, which is environment, social and governance sensitivity has to be at the top of our mind. I think if we are with that sensitivity move to the new world, new scenarios, I think we'll be able to handle the challenges in much more better manner. Of course, at our institution we have a detailed curriculum and detailed program with the students on making them ESG sensitive and helping them to use the ESG frameworks in most of the investment decisions and most of the business decisions. And I'm sure that you will all devote some time on sharpening the focus on the ESG framework, how to identify some key indicators to measure the ESG principles, and developing the appreciation of its usefulness. This is, I would especially like to highlight this as one very important competency which all of us need to build to handle the future. Well, with these words, I welcome again all of you to this conference. I'm sure that you will be much richer in terms of your understanding and the kind of challenges which we are facing, and certainly the deliberations are going to help you to develop the strategic approach to deal with these issues. And wish you all the best, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for those very interesting insights. I would now like to welcome our chief guest and keynote speaker for the conference today, Professor Giuseppe Fontana, Professor of Monetary Economics at the Leeds University Business School. We are so grateful to you, sir, for taking out time from your busy schedule to be part of our annual conference here at SAMSO. Professor Fontana, in addition to being Professor of Monetary Economics at the University of Leeds, is also an associate member at the Cambridge Center for Economic and Public Policy, research associate at the Levy Economics Institute, US, and associate professor at the University of Sannio, Italy. Sir was also an elected member of the Board of Directors, Eastern Economic Association, United States, 2011 to 14. And at the 2015 ASSA meetings at Boston, was elected president of the Association for Social Economics. Professor Fontana was also a member of the coordinating team or executive board and work package leader of the research project FESSUD, a multidisciplinary project funded by the European Commission, which aim to forge alliances across the social sciences so as to better understand how finance can serve economic, social, and environmental needs. Thank you once again, sir, for being here with us today. Attendees, please note, this session will be followed by a question and answer session moderated by Dr. Anand. I request all attendees to please post their questions on the chat box, which will be taken up by Professor Fontana after his keynote speech. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Shall I share the screen with my presentation?
Yes, sir, sure. Okay.
Let me see. That's the end. Okay. Can you see and hear me fine? Okay. Yes. Well, first of all, let me say good morning from a sunny, warm Leeds. Very unusually sunny and warm Leeds. It seems to be already in summer. And many thanks really for the invitation to be part of this conference. And I share the words said before. Unfortunately, we can't be meeting face to face, and I hope in future there will be that opportunity. It will be a great pleasure to thank you personally for the kind invitation and the generous word that have been used to introduce me. When I was preparing the slides a few days ago, I reflected, as some of you did, on the title of this conference, and indeed I was really touched by the words crisis, so it's plural, not one, and challenges and the way ahead. And indeed, from this side of the world, I have to say we are experiencing plenty of crises. As we all had, we had the 2007-2008 global financial crisis. Then where I'm speaking, we experienced Brexit and the impact of Brexit. Then, of course, we had the COVID-19 crisis. And sadly, very sadly, I would say, now we are experiencing the impact of the war between Russia and Ukraine. So we have 4 major crises. And if you want, as at least personally, I think then there is the mother of all crises, which is the climate change crisis. So it is indeed a very unprecedented time. And I agree with the words said before that we do need all the energy, enthusiasm, and expertise to navigate these very difficult times. So my talk is really part of that. And of course, I will only talk about one of those crises, which is the COVID-19 crisis. And I will look at the case of Italy. But I will argue that actually there would be important lessons to be learned, not only for Italy, but for other countries as well, and possibly for the way to respond to other crises. So this is a joint work with Rosa Canelli, Riccardo De Alfonso, and Marco Veronese Passarella. My colleagues, some are in Leeds, some are in Italy. Now, if I can briefly introduce the structure of my presentation. Well, it is now evident that the immediate impact of the COVID-19 crisis has been more dramatic and, in a sense, complicated than the immediate impact of 2007-2008 financial crisis. But differently from the global financial crisis in 2007-2008, the policy response of the European policymakers has been very strong and decisive. And the same can be said also by the Italian government. So what we have done in this work, we have tried to model the immediate impact of the COVID-19 crisis together with the policy response by EU and Italian policymakers. And we have used a particular methodology, the Stockflow consistent method, in order to get some understanding of what are the current situation and what are the challenges and ahead. And if I have time, I will also do a thought experiment. What if we are a bit more radical and we try to think about an alternative expansionary EU policy? What could be the result of that before concluding? So let me start with a brief summary of the EU policy response. So I said that the immediate impact of the COVID-19 crisis in Europe has been really dramatic. But differently from the past, the EU is responding strongly and decisively. So the European Central Bank has kept the discount rate low and has launched what is called the PEPs, so the Pandemic Emergency Program, which basically it's a program that consists of buying private and public sector security on the secondary market without taking into account, strictly at least, the population and the GDP variables of the member state in Europe, what we call the capital key. This program amounts to around 1,850 billion euros. This, of course, is the monetary policy response. If you look at the European Council, so the fiscal policy response, we had a package of fiscal intervention to relaunch investment in the European Union. And among these fiscal intervention, prominent is so-called the Next Generation EU, which are basically loans and grants to member states that are worth circa 360 billion euros and 309 billion euros respectively. I will say a bit more about this difference between loans and grants later on. Other fiscal intervention include what we call for short SURE, in other words, a European instrument for temporary support to mitigate unemployment risk in an emergency. In fact, there is already a call for something similar as a response to the impact of the war between Russia and Ukraine, in other words, to cope with the short-term impact in terms of unemployment. There has also been a European Stability Mechanism, crisis support, and several instruments put forward by the European Investment Bank. Another important measure, very important, I would say, measure has been the suspension of the Stability and Growth Pact, together with other institutional budget constraints, which are allowed member states in the European Union to respond with domestic measure as well. So in terms of domestic measure, Italy indeed has launched additional fiscal measures to the one just discussed by the European Union to contain the negative impact of the COVID-19 crisis. As a result of those measures, the deficit to GDP ratio in 2020 was around 10%, and the government debt to GDP ratio was close to 155%. Now, let me make the case why we are studying Italy. Of course, you may say, well, you were born in Italy and your co-author are born in Italy. Certainly, there is some of that, but there is more than that. And the reason for really looking at the case of Italy is because of the particular political and economic features of Italy. Italy is the third largest economy in the European Union, together with basically France and Germany. And Italy, that's in a sense a worrying side, it's also the main EU economy that had not yet recovered the pre-financial crisis level of GDP at the end of 2019. So before COVID-19 hit Italy, we still didn't get to the level pre-2007, 2008. And if that was not the bad news enough, that before the COVID-19 crisis hit Italy, Italy had the highest government debt to GDP ratio in the European Union after Greece. So I think there is a lot to be learned by the experience of a country like Italy, not only for the COVID-19, but also in terms of what the policy response could be, for instance, to vis-a-vis the new crisis that we have in Europe, and more generally, for instance, in terms of the climate change crisis. So in terms of input, in terms of sort, the EU policy applied to Italy, we said we have this program of by the European Central Bank, what we call the PEP. This has affected the cost of refinancing the Italian government debt, which is very important, because at the end of 2021, still there was a spread of 130 points over the 10-year German bonds. So that intervention of the ECB was very important. In terms of fiscal policy, we have several forms of intervention here, but certainly the most important is the new generation EU funds available for Italy during the period 2020-2026, which are expected to be 122.6 billion euros in loans and then the 82.5 billion euros in grants. And again, I will explain the difference between loans and euros in a minute. So what we have tried to do in our work, we have tried to assess the impact on the Italian economy of this EU and domestic policy to tackle the COVID-19 crisis using a particular methodology, what we call the Stockflow consistent approach. Now, Stockflow consistent approach have a very long tradition in economics. In fact, they go back to the Coles Foundation in Yale and the work of James Tobin, Nobel Prize James Tobin. But then for a very long time, in a sense, they have been ignored. One of the reasons is that it's a structural macroeconomic econometric model. But recently they have been rediscovered thanks to the work of a professor in Cambridge, Godley, that also works at the Levy Institute in the United States, and in particular the work by Godley and Lavoie in 2007, because they really provide very realistic projection of the effect of the global financial crisis, where other methodology were actually failing in that. What we liked about that methodology is the focus on the monetary and financial side of the economic system. In other words, many other empirical models may not reflect necessarily very well in terms of this monetary and financial side of the economic system, as well as what we like was interdependencies that connect the balance sheet of the different institutional sector to the real transactions, to the what happened in the real sector. The model we have used has been coded and calibrated using the software framework BIMETS, which is provided by the Bank of Italy, views of Eurostat data, annual time series over 1995-2020. And we have 6 macroeconomic sectors in our model. So we have firms, bank, the central bank, namely the ECB, the government, household, and the foreign sector. The way in which we have tried to represent the impact of COVID-19, of the pandemic, as well as the policy responses, we divided these factors in terms of economic factors and policy factors. So the economic factors, we have captured the direct effect of the COVID-19 crisis in terms of the change in the at-home consumption, therefore the effect of agri demand and agri supply. In terms of the policy factors, we looked at the reduction in tax revenue and the additional spending by the Italian government. We look at the PEP by the ECB and the markdown on the average interest rate on the Italian government bonds, given the high level of government debt to GDP ratio was very important to capture that markdown on the interest rate. And in terms of fiscal stimulus, we look at loans, a grant by the new generation EU, but also the sure loans, which are very short term, over the period 2021-2026. And we produce the baseline of our model. And as I said before, maybe it's worth to clarify that the NGEU funds are divided in loans and grants. And especially for Italy, that's a very important distinction. Now, Italy got 131.9 billion loans by the European Union authorities and 82.5 billions in terms of grants. Now, the difference is very important. I was saying, why is important? Because loans determine a corresponding equal increase in Italian government, where grants generate an increase of Italian government debt in proportion to the percentage of the Italian contribution to the EU budget. Okay, so if I show, these are basically the factors we have introduced in our model. Now, let's take a year, 2023. So Italy will not receive sure loans because are short term to cover basically by the shocks to the unemployment level. So there will be zero loans in 2023. But Italy will get 16.2 billions in terms of loans. Now, these 16.2 billions, they are loans. So therefore, they create a corresponding equal amount of government debt, which is going to be added basically to the government debt to GDP ratio that Italy will have in 2023. In the same years, Italy will receive 26.5 billions NGU grants. Now, grants, as I said before, they don't create an equal amount of government debt. In fact, of these 26.5 billions grants, Italy will only contribute to the fund from which those grants are drawn by 15.1 billion. So this is the amount that, in a sense, is Italy will experience in terms of additional government bonds. And of course, given the size of the government bonds in Italy, this is a quite significant difference. So let me look at the result of our model, because that's the most, in a sense, exciting part of our exercise here. So you will see there are two figures here. So on the left side, you see the evolution of the growth rate in Italy over the period 1995-2026. On the right side, you see the evolution of the government debt to GDP ratio over the same period. Now, the black line is one, okay? This is the observed path of the growth rate and the government debt to GDP ratio for the period 1995-2020. So these are observed data, while the black dashed line, this indicates what the model predicts to be the path of those two variables, so the growth rate and the government debt to GDP ratio, if we didn't have the COVID-19, okay? And the red line is basically show the model forecast for those two variables, so growth rate and government debt to GDP ratio over the period 2021-2026. So let me see a bit more in details the numbers. So as you can see on the left side, there was a huge shock as a result of the pandemic. So you can see there has been a contraction in Italy of 8.9%. In 2021, there was a strong rebound of 6.1%. And then you will see that as we keep going in this, with the current policy and so on, the growth rate will move by the end of this observation period, so 2026, around 1.2%. In terms of government to debt to GDP ratio, again, so we have the spike caused by the COVID-19. So the government debt to GDP ratio reached 155.6%. There is a small decline as a result of the rebound in 2021, and then again the government debt to GDP ratio keep increasing. So the immediate visual implication of that is that the EU and domestic policy response is good, but is not good enough because it's not guaranteeing, in a sense, a sustainable growth rate and a sustainable level to government debt to GDP ratio. We look a bit more at this government debt to GDP ratio, given the particular economic situation of Italy. So what we have here is what we call the basically the the debt sustainability condition. So we basically drew on the work of many economists, including Pasinetti from the University of Cambridge, and to derive what we call, as I said, the sustainability condition for the government debt, which holds that the primary balance must cover the net debt burden. And what we define as the net debt burden is the average cost of the debt as defined by the average interest rate adjusted for the nominal GDP growth. And as you can see, basically, as the COVID-19 crisis hit, the net change in interest burden shoot up, basically increased dramatically and well above the primary balance. So that it's an indication of how unsustainable is the government debt in Italy. There was a period, you cannot even see here, where in 2021, because of the rebound of the economy, actually the primary balance was above the net change in interest rate burden. But as you can see, as we progress during the next few years, the primary balance is always below the net change in interest rate burden. So in other words, this tells us that the level of government debt in Italy is unsustainable, at least in our observation period, given the current level of policy. So again, the message is that certainly things have improved. So in other words, the EU policy response and the domestic policy response has been good. Imagine, look what there was here before and what there is now, but it's not good enough because it doesn't make the government debt sustainable in Italy. So it's a similar type of message we had before. Then what we did is said, okay, let's see the way ahead, what we can do in order to understand what the policymaker, in a sense, could do in future. So here we have basically the same type of variable. So the GDP on the left side and the government debt on the right side. And basically, this dot line here is the pre-shock forecast. In other words, what our model predict will have been the path of these two variables without the COVID-19 crisis. This is our baseline. The black line is the baseline. So that tells us what is basically the present state of economic policy. So the baseline, the black line include basically the effect of the COVID-19 crisis, the Italian government expansionary fiscal measure, the ECB support, so the so-called PEP, for instance, and the fiscal intervention by the European Union authorities, so including the new generation EU funding. And as you can see, again, there are positive effects, but by the end of our observation period, by 2026, our GDP is still below what was pre-shock. So you can see there is certainly an improvement compared to the shocks in 2019, but it's not yet catched the pre-COVID-19 level. And if you consider that the pre-COVID-19 level in Italy was already below the pre-2007, 2008, so pre-global financial crisis, that's really a worrying feature of the Italian economy. And the same you can see here. So before the COVID-19, the government debt to GDP ratio was declining, honestly, from a very high level. But there was some decline, which was a positive features in a sense of the pre-COVID-19 crisis. The COVID-19 crisis, of course, dramatically increased the government debt to GDP ratio. We said was around 155%. And you will see that the current policy have basically stabilized the situation, but certainly are not making that ratio sustainable over the long term. So then we experience a couple of different scenarios. So the blue line here is no intervention. Okay, so let's see if nothing happened. And as you can see, the situation is worse than the current policy intervention. So in other words, there is certainly a positive effect of the EU and the Italian government intervention, as you can see, comparing the dark black line with the blue line. But let's see a couple over policy, for instance, scenario that some economists have discussed: austerity. So austerity, I think we have two policies here: the strong austerity and mild austerity. I think strong austerity is a cut in the order of 10% of government spending, taking 2019 as the year of reference. And that's the strong austerity is 10%. The mild austerity is half of that, so it's 5% cut in government spending. As you can see, actually the effects are dramatic here, because you can see that the level of GDP declined dramatically. And even the mild austerity is not helping at all. Indeed, it's much worse than no intervention at all. In terms of government debt to GDP ratio, you can see actually the strong austerity will bring over the short term, within the next few years, the government debt to GDP ratio to over 180%, and no much better will be the mild austerity. So the message here is that, again, in effect, is reinforcing what we have said before. The EU and the Italian government policy response has been good, but not good enough. And if you want to experiment with what something was very popular before the COVID-19 austerity measure, you will see that actually things can get really completely out of control with government debt to GDP ratio of 180% in Italy. So, is anything else we could think about? And here, if I'm allowed maybe another couple of extra minutes, I will present a very radical proposal, in a sense, or scenario. It's radical because this the idea is a thought experiment. What if there is the political and economic will to give Italy, or any other country in Europe, but let's say Italy, because we are studying the case of Italy, enough additional resource to bring the income, the GDP growth, to the pre-COVID trend. So in other words, what if the European Union authorities decide to give additional resources to Italy such that to bring the current GDP growth trend back to the pre-COVID trend? That amounts to around 25% of all currently planned energy funds to Italy. So it's a massive help, additional help to Italy by the European Union policymaker. We also had quite strong assumption in the sense that these additional EU resources are completely financed by the EU authorities, so the ECB, so there will not be any impact in terms of government debt. So the government debt will not increase because it will be a money finance additional spending. We also make the strong assumption that all this new spending is converted, all this new funding is converted in new spending. Usually, out of 100, 78% is converted in new spending, and 20-30% is basically it's financing of old planned spending. But let's assume, for the sake of it, let's be bold in our radical view and say that all this new spending is, all this new funding is entirely spent. And of course, as I said, there will be no contribution by the Italian government, so there will be no increase in the government debt. Therefore, from these additional resources will not have any impact on the government debt to GDP ratio. What will be the result? Well, you will not be surprised that, in a sense, GDP goes back to trend, but the interesting thing is this will be a very fast return to the pre-COVID-19 trend. And indeed, by 2026, you can see that actually we have well exceeded the pre-COVID-19 trend. So the impact it is quite powerful. The same can be said about the government debt to GDP ratio. As I said, we made very strong assumption, but if you can see, this is the forecast of the model if we didn't have COVID-19, so there will have been a decline from very high level of government debt to GDP ratio. This is the current situation with the policy we have in place. And this is in yellow line is what will happen if we have this additional resource. Now you will see it will be a quite dramatic change in the government debt to GDP ratio. Not sort of converging immediately in the short term to the level pre-COVID, but basically there is a quite dramatic reduction in the government debt to GDP ratio. So as I said, this is a radical proposal, but I think can be illuminating the policy debate. I mean, there was last week a conference in Versailles by members of the European Union to see how they could respond to the impact of the war between Russia and Ukraine. And indeed, there was a discussion by the Prime Minister of Italy, Mario Draghi, former ECB president, together with the president of France, Macron. They were really pushing for the type of intervention that we just described in this bold, radical expansionary EU policy. So they were arguing for additional resources because this, in a sense, the crisis we are experiencing is a new crisis. So we have to move even beyond, in a sense, the EU policy response to COVID-19 because we are facing an unprecedented new crisis. And the type of resource they were thinking was along the line of what we have experienced here. So you can see that actually, our experiment here, our scenario may help to think the type of impact that this may have. So in terms of conclusion, what we can say is that, as I said, that domestic EU policy are welcome, but the way we frame is that are the best emergency measure that have slowly halted the dramatic decline in GDP and employment, which I didn't have figures here for the sake of not adding extra picture here, but also employment in Italy. And certainly have delay temporarily a further increase in the government debt to GDP ratio. But domestic EU policy, as they are now, they are not going to bring either the government finance or GDP to pre-COVID-19 levels, let alone to bring those indicators to more sustainable long-term levels. And what we have here, we have this experiment, very radical scenario of a back to trend scenario, which forecasts a 25% expansion of the energy fund, entirely financed by the ECB and spent by the Italian government. And this is what we have seen as a remarkable positive impact, not only on GDP, but also on the government finance in Italy. So what this scenario tells us that the EU monetary and fiscal authority have the power to move the Italian economy and other economy, of course, in Europe towards a path of sustainable growth with positive outcome for both employment and government finance. I will stop here, just say that if people are interested, there is a couple of background papers that basically support the type of argument I was put forward in this presentation. And conclude just thanking everyone for listening and for allowing me to present this work at your event. And I'm more than happy to take question and comment and suggestion are always also very welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. That was a very, very insightful session. I would now like to invite Dr. Anand to take on the questions, if there are any.
Hello, Dr. Fontana. We have a couple of questions here. I'll read it out for you. The first question is from Dia herself. She says, I understand that hindsight is 2020 vision, but how do you believe this forecast would change if the degree of lockdown was varied, or was the lockdown policy optimal according to you, especially from the point of view of economic losses in terms of output and employment?
Oh, thank you. Well, that's a very difficult question because optimal, here we have to confront the real world. I think that, I hear, people complaining about the lockdown and the politician. I think, we have to separate the economics from the politics and the social impact. Because in a sense, we can only talk with our little expertise. I will say that certainly I felt sorry for the politician, and they had to make very unprecedented decision, because this is something we never experienced before. So I think if it was optimal or not, I think it's very difficult to assess, because it was unprecedented. So I think different countries experience different impacts. They play with different policy. You know, UK was very much different from Italy. So, you know, I think that there will be more and more time required in order to make an assessment of what would have been the ideal policy response. I think we need to take into consideration the institutional differences. So, for instance, in Italy, in particular in some region in Italy, the south of Italy, the health service, has a very well-known lack of infrastructure. So you have to take into account also the characteristic of the countries that you are considering. So I think it would be a bit premature to generalize and say what was optimal. I think it was a very unprecedented situation, but I think what our analysis shows, it's certainly the EU policymakers have learned a lesson vis-a-vis the 2007-2008 crisis. So their response was very effective in Europe, and in particular in a country like Italy. I think my main message, as I said, was that it was very powerful, very good, but not good enough. And I think it is not good enough, especially now, because we have another crisis in Europe. I mean, it's very sad that we are experiencing another war on European soil. And the impact of that is going to come in the next few months. And I think, I will agree with Mario Draghi and President Macron that European policymakers, they have to step up again and respond to those new challenges. Without forgetting, I think this is the challenge here, that yes, there is an immediate impact of the war between Ukraine and Russia in Europe, but there is also a long-term impact due to the climate change. So the solution have not only to be, in a sense, immediate and strong, but they also have to take into account this background crisis that is the climate change crisis. So in terms of investment, going back to some of the comments made at the beginning, they have to be strong, but also, put in context that we have another major crisis, the mother of all crises, if you want, which is the climate change crisis. And so we don't have to take shortcut to respond in the short term to this crisis. We have to have a long-term perspective, and this is very difficult politically as well. It's I think that policymakers have a very difficult task done, because the amount of shocks that the economy are experiencing are just unbelievable. In this country, we have also the effect of Brexit. I mean, people are ignoring that we have also that impact in UK and Europe. And so therefore there are so many, in effect, challenges that the policymaker, I think, have a difficult task ahead.
Thank you, Professor Fontana. We have one more question here. This is from Saya. How expansionary policy power, as per your presentation, can take care of inflation while mitigating the negative impact on the macroeconomic variables, especially GDP?
Yeah, that I think it's a new scenario where we are. I mean, the forecast level of inflation is unprecedented for decades now. We have been used to a very low, stable level of inflation, and unfortunately, with all these shocks that mainly on the supply side, I must say that they are supply side shock. So mainly the type of phenomenon we are experiencing is cost push inflation, but the reality is there are second round effect on the demand side as well. So that's where I think some of the challenges, new challenges for policymakers come from, is they are in a very new environment. We are going back to the 1970s type of situation in terms of inflation, and that I think the way I will look at it is, keep this long-term perspective. So yes, you have to have expansionary fiscal policy, but think in terms of the long-term investment. So the transition toward a much more sustainable growth rate, sustainable in terms of climate change, to respond to the climate change. And so there is here, in a sense, a challenge to respond immediately to the effect of the current crisis in Europe, but as well as keep in mind that there is this long-term crisis in the background, which is the climate change. So I would say that we have to have most of the fiscal expansion has to be in terms of moving toward a much more sustainable economy.
Thank you, Dr. Fontana. Back to Dia.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much, Professor Fontana, for that very, very interesting session with especially the projections. And it would be very interesting to see where we go from here, especially as you mentioned in the context of the Ukraine-Russia war and, of course, the long game that we are playing with climate change. So as we come to an end of this inaugural session, I would again like to thank Professor Fontana for addressing us today. Dr. Ramesh Bhatt, Vice Chancellor, NMIMS, Ms. Meena Saxena, Director, International Linkages, Mr. Gunjan Godbole, Manager, International Linkages, Ms. Ellen Wang, Faculty, International Manager, the University of Leeds. Of course, Professor Amita Vaidya, Director, Sarla Anil Modi School of Economics, and all faculty, students, and attendees. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Also, please note that the technical session A1, chaired by Dr. Santosh Kumar Sahu, IIT Madras, will be conducted on the same link, that is Zoom link 1, after a brief break of 10 minutes, running parallel on Zoom link 2, also starting at in the next 10 minutes, will be technical session A2, chaired by Dr. Rahul Sapkal, IIT Bombay. Further at 5:50 on Zoom link 2, please do join in for technical session B1, chaired by Dr. Rahul Sapkal, again, IIT Bombay. Finally, we will conclude the conference with the speech delivered by Professor Viral Acharya, followed by the announcement of Best Paper Awards and the vote of thanks delivered by Professor Amita Vaidya. Thank you so much. We at Sarla Anil Modi School of Economics look forward to seeing you all at the technical and valedictory sessions. And once again, thank you so much to Dr. Fontana.
Thank you, Dr. Fontana. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Very good afternoon to all. So we are starting our technical session. We have Dr. Santosh Kumar Sahu from IIT Madras with us. Thank you, Dr. Santosh, for joining. I have made you the co-host. So
there are like multiple.
Yeah. Thank you, Anand. Thank you for the invitation.
Suppose if we want to like predict something, if we want to like predict something, if we like export data.
Yes, sorry.
Neural network.
Yeah.
Can like be a help.
Hello.
Sir, Santosh. I mean, I thought sound is from your room. Or, I think yeah, we can start, right?
Anand, am I?
Yeah, you are audible. You are audible.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible. Yeah. So we have the first paper, Sanhita Mandal. Sanhita Mandal is here. Yes, Sanhita Mandal and Shivani Mehta. Sanhita, you can switch on. I just make you the co-host. You can switch on the video and start your presentations. Thank you. Yeah.
I hope I'm visible.
Yes. So as per I'm been informed by Dr. Anand that you please present for 10 minutes and followed by the discussion will happen for around 6 minutes. And then we'll take the public questions around 6 minutes. So kindly make your presentation crisp and clear in 6 minutes so that we're able to cover all 4 papers in the session, right?
Okay, ma'am. Okay. So, good evening, honorable organizers and esteemed jury. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm Sanhita Mandal and my faculty guide.
Yeah. So, please start the paper and I also invite. Sure.
Sorry, ma'am, you're not audible.
Kindly present. Yes, please.
Okay. Okay. So I'm going to present the paper titled as Can Mergers Enhance the Banking Industry? An Analysis of State Bank of India. The objective behind this study is to interpret the significance of mergers in the banking industry and also to examine the benefits and downside of the bank mergers and acquisitions and to basically analyze the pre and post merger performance of the State Bank of India. So starting with the introduction, as we all know in today's business world, the most common method of reorganization is merging. So as a result, they are able to expand and broaden their company's operations. In 1991, India's industrial strategy made a dramatic shift, paving the door for the first wave of M&A investment in the country. And India's strong economic expansion has prompted local corporations to engage in more aggressive investments, which has resulted in spectacular increase in the M&A. So the success of our economy, it basically depends on a strong banking system. So as the banking business becomes more competitive, it makes sense for Indian banks to combine in order to improve the operational efficiencies and also, the profitability while lowering the operating expenses. Mergers and acquisitions, they are expected to be pursued both by public and the private domestic banks, notwithstanding the harsh competition and challenges from the overseas corporations. As a result, M&A, that is the mergers and acquisitions, is the way to go. The merger, it provides a wide range of favorable impressions and including better service to clients. And as a tool for strategic management, human resource, the acquisitions, they enable companies to expand, contract, or otherwise alter the nature and competitiveness for their activities. So as a result of the merger, banks, they will be able to enter new markets. Also, you broaden their geographic scope and open additional locations in rural areas. So the paper is on the, it occurred on April 1st, 2017, the analysis of the State Bank of India, which I am doing, that it merged with 5 of its associate banks, that is namely the State Bank of Bikaner and Jaipur, State Bank of Mysore, State Bank of Travancore, State Bank of Patiala, and State Bank of Hyderabad. This study, it generates an understanding of ideas, interdisciplinary, and brings into conversation views of several scholars on the effect of mergers on the banking industry. So the study, the data analysis for the study, the data regarding the number of branches, the number of employees, deposits collected by the bank, the total advances granted, and net profit for the year 2013 to 2021, it was collected from the State Bank of India's annual report, and based only on secondary data, the research is essentially descriptive. So for data analysis, null and an alternative hypothesis was formed for the each parameter, H0 being that there is no significant difference in the deposits, advances, and the net profit per employee and branch of SBI before and after the merger, and H1 being that there is a significant difference in the deposits, advances, net profits per employee and branch of SBI before and after the merger. So basically these tables, they are the results of all the selected parameters. There were 3 cases taken with the key variables, and these are the results for the same. The key findings, the results show that the variables such as the deposits, advances, and net profits with respect to employees and branches, they have their calculated T value greater than the T critical value, and the P value, it is less than the significance level. So therefore, which means that the null hypothesis is rejected, and there is a significant difference in the profitability performance of SBI pre and post merger. Coming to the conclusions and suggestions, banks want to boost their growth by reducing costs and leveraging synergies. It might benefit from the merger. So improved performance and expenditure reduction, growth in market share, and the acquisition of new talent are all examples of positive influences in mergers. Long and cumbersome processes, cultural differences, staff dissatisfaction, and other negative repercussions of the mergers on the banking business are also all the factors to consider. So the research, it shows that SBI's balance sheets and financial parameters have basically improved after the merger. So as a whole, the merger between the SBI and its 5 associate banks have proven to be success in improving the performance of SBI post-merger and allowing it to benefit from the advantages of economies of scope and scale. Some parameters such as the net profit margin and the capital sufficiency that show a negative impact from the merger may be rectified in order to reap the full benefits of it. The merger's impact on managerial effectiveness, it is another important consideration. Modern and sophisticated technologies may help with this. So after the merger or after the consolidation, the focus should be on cutting the cost. So such measures, it will help the merger achieve its goal and create a favorable image for the company. If banks, they can't maintain a healthy equity debt ratio by servicing their loans, it would become more difficult. So banks, they should make an effort to create new and unique programs to keep and attract the new clients to their services in order to make them more desirable to their customers. Thank you.
Sanita, for the presentation. And I invite Sabar Ahmed Shah of IIT Ropar to present the discussion questions, followed by the questions by participants. Do you have Anand? Sabar Ahmed Shah is there? Is present?
Yeah, he's here. I can see him. Hello, Saya. Can you hear us?
Yeah. allowed to speak. He says
Yes,
allowed
yes,
to
yes,
speak.
yes, yes, yes.
Yes, please go ahead.
Yes. Yeah, please go ahead, Sai.
Good afternoon, everyone. Sunita, it was a very good presentation. I have certain observations from your presentation, followed by which I'll be needing some clarifications from you. So, as far as the title of the study is concerned, title mentions that can mergers enhance the banking industry and analysis of State Bank of India. So, enhances, the word enhance is, I think, you should look into that whether the enhance is appropriate or not. And the table of the contents and chapterization, I think it is not mandatory so far as the research article is concerned. And you are mentioning study uses M&A. So first of all, we have to give the abbreviation of the M&A explanation. After that, you can use the M&A for means merger and acquisition. And there is a shift. What I have observed is that there is a shift from introduction to the scenario of the SBI. So there is no research motivated by this, so that so I made an observation that you should incorporate some literature between the two sections, so that introduction should be separated from the literature review in order to create research gaps. There should be a triangulation between the introduction, so that literature can be introduction can be triangulated with the literature, followed by theoretical background and motivation, so as to make your paper more appealing, I can say. And some major reviews are needed to this paper, because some table notes are missing and some table numbers are repeated somewhere. Some citations are also missing. As you have mentioned, that Maharashtra is ranked 270th as per the Fortune Global 500 list of world biggest enterprises. So you should put citation on that, so to make it more authentic. I need certain clarifications from this this article. As you mentioned in the second objective, that it examines the benefits and downside of the bank mergers and acquisitions. But I think this downside is not appropriate. So I need some clarification regarding what actually you mean by the downside. Second question is that you are mentioning that research shows SBI balance sheet and financial parameters has improved after the merger. As the whole, the merger between SBI and its 5 associate banks, like as you are mentioning, improve the performance of SBI post merger. But my question is that how your findings are different from other findings. Can you substantiate these findings as in accordance with the available literature in your area? Third query is that how modern and sophisticated, as you are mentioned, sophisticated techniques like cloud computing can enhance the performance so far as your objective is concerned. Thank you.
Okay, sir. So thank you for the questions. And basically, while doing this paper, I have done 60 literature reviews and a proper 60 literature reviews. So I need to add it to the appendix. So there will be a proper 60 literature reviews regarding my topic, as this is a secondary data, as I've done secondary research. And secondly, you have asked that regarding my second objective, like about the downside. So it's not necessary that always a merger, it benefits a company. For example, while choosing my topic, first I had taken Vodafone and Idea, but the merger was not successful. It was not completely successful. It's still ongoing. There are certain mergers which are not always successful. So that's why the title goes, can it enhance the banking industry? Can a particular merger, can the mergers which are happening in rows, can they enhance the banking industry?
No, objective, let me interfere, sorry. Objective is quite, I am saying that word downside you are using, so please have a look on that, whether it is appropriate to use.
Okay, sir, I'll look into it, that if I can modify my objective according to my paper. I'll look into it. And
so thank you. Yes. Thank you very much for the questions. Maybe it seems that the discussant has actually gone through the paper, and there are quite a lot of observations that the discussant has given. And if possible, discussant can also inform you, email you the concerns, so that it will be.
Although I have a reading to your paper, you can contact me. I had certain other observations, because of paucity of time, I cannot include all of them, so that you can contact me.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sure. Wonderful. So a critical analysis of each paper is highly beneficial for the growth of the paper and leads to a publication.
Otherwise,
so thank you very much.
Sir, if time allows me, I can share some more observations.
No, I think let's take some paper from some of the participants, for example, Neil has a question. Neil Shah has a question, I think. He's raised his hand.
Okay.
So please make the question very, very short. If you have a question. Okay, no. He has something else to say. Is there a question from the floor? Can we have 1 or 2 questions, or I will allow Syed to go on asking to the presenter? Okay, so Syed, you can have a quick question, maybe a suggestion or a question to the presenter, Sahita. Syed, you are on mute. You are on mute, Syed.
So as my third question pertaining to how cloud computing can enhance the employees' performance, as you have mentioned, one of the policy recommendation in your paper. So can you please make clarification regarding that?
Cloud computing, as my suggestion. Okay, you're asking about my suggestion. So cloud computing, in the sense, in banking industry, the technologies need to be more advanced. As we are, as the industry 4.0, 2.0 is going on. So we need to advance our technology. So cloud computing is one of my suggestions, so that the banks who are merging can take it as a step for the better performance of their employees, and they can track all the employees, the branches, the working, the deposits collected, the advances, net profits given to them. So it is one suggestion from my side, that they can use it as to benefit.
Yes, thank you. And one more observation is that whether when there is a merger in a bank, this is from my personal experience or observation, I can say, when there is merger and acquisition of a bank, cannot it going to affect the regional diversity? Like when we are merging 5 branches into a single branch, so there could be a single management into that. So because of single management, it could not address all the regional aspirations of the customers, being they are diverse from different areas. Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah, so thank you very much for the presentation, and I now invite the next paper presenter to kindly keep it short, and maybe if we can wind up in 20 minutes the entire process, that would be great. Anand? Yeah, so Sumit has started sharing the screen.
Yes.
Sumit, please go ahead.
I hope I'm audible.
Yes, you are audible.
Okay, very good afternoon to everyone present in this virtual conference. I would like to thank the organizers for giving us the opportunity to present our paper. Respected chairperson of this session and all the dignitaries present over this virtual conference. The title of our paper is India's COVID-19 Vaccine Policy, a Game Theoretic Approach. It's a joint paper, as you can see, co-authored by myself, Professor Arindam Laha of the Department of Commerce, University of Burdwan, and Dr. Subir Kumar Sen from the Tripura University. As we all know, can you see the changes in the PPT?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we all know that the world is facing an unprecedented challenge due to the emergence of COVID-19 pandemic. And since the first outbreak of it in December 2019 in China, it spread like a forest fire across the globe. If we see the current total number of 480.08 million cases are there, with 6.1 million deaths. And it's spread in almost 227 countries at in the present time. US is at the top in terms of the cases, followed by India. The high rate of infections and mortalities due to the COVID-19 pandemic speaks about the severity of this current pandemic. Now, this is what happens actually whenever there is a pandemic kind of situation. So any kind of novel virus, when it spreads, it creates an unprecedented health crisis due to it creates serious illness among the people, and followed by a huge number of mortalities. And in order to tackle these situations, the policymakers and the government of different countries have no other options but to go for lockdown. And as we know that once the lockdown is implemented, then it creates serious socioeconomic implications. the entire economic activity gets disrupted. But there is huge socioeconomic disruptions, unemployment problem, there will be reverse migrations, and overall there will be an economic depression. So, and once the lockdown is implemented, then obviously the number of the cases will definitely reduce because of this strict measures which is adopted in the lockdown. And and that will be followed by easing of the restrictions by the different governments. That will be coupled by pandemic fatigue and people negligence, and that will lead, and at the same point of time, the virus will get a chance to mutate itself, and that will result in spread of a new variant of that virus. And again, in order to curb that, the government and the policymakers will have to adopt either the total or partial lockdown, and then it goes on cyclically in this manner. So the containment of the virus, in order to stop it, in order to curb it, we have two options. One is the lockdown, which has serious socioeconomic implications. And on the other end, to another positive side, another positive approaches that we have is that strict adherence to the COVID-19 protocols and mass vaccination. Now, if we can do that, there will be reduction in the infections. There will be the people will get immunity against serious problems, and that will reduce also mortalities, and it will also curb the possibility of emergence of any kind of new variant, which will definitely help the economy to be get back into the normal situations. There will be economic recovery, and all the problems associated with the lockdown can be tackled by. So vaccination or inoculation is the only viable options that we have. And for that, there is a huge amount of requirement of research and development. And once the research and development is completed, and the pharmaceutical companies and scientists come out with different vaccines, it needs to be produced at a large scale. So mass vaccination or mass vaccine production is important. Not only the mass vaccine production is important, it is also important that the vaccine should be distributed equally. Otherwise, if one part of the population is not vaccinated and the other part is vaccinated, the virus will get a chance where the people are not immunized or not inoculated due to that. Now, in that equality process, COVAX is a global initiative which helps in equality of the distribution. Now, as far as the mass vaccine production is concerned, then there are certain problems which restricts the production of the vaccines at a larger scale, which is mainly due to the limited number of vaccines. We know 178 candidates were there, however, only WHO allowed 10 to 15, to use it on an emergency basis. There is patent related issue. It prohibits any other companies to go into the production, and at the same time, TRIPS related waivers are also required, and these are one of the major problems which prohibits the mass production of the vaccines. Now, once the mass production of the vaccines gets adversely affected, it will create short-run supply shortage. And in order to protect the reach, in order to protect itself from this kind of short supply, the rich and vaccine producing nations, what they will do, they will try to secure majority of the vaccine supplies by going into the advanced pricing agreement with those kind of pharmaceutical companies. And that is basically what we know as vaccine nationalism, which refers to the problem of rich and vaccine developing countries in securing majority of the supplies to inoculate its own people first. And that will have an adverse impact like price discrimination, inequity. It will lead to more mutations as majority of the people of the globe will not be inoculated, and that will also delay the overall economic progress of the world as a whole. Now, if we, and this is the projections that how the people are going to be inoculated in coming years. Now, this is India's policy regarding the vaccine, distribution. India has broadly followed the vaccine diplomacy program. And under this vaccine diplomacy, India has adopted a central policy of vaccine Maitri under these COVAX, SARC, COVID-19 Emergency Fund, Commercial Grant, Neighborhood, and these are the precedents of South-South Triangular Cooperation and South-South North Cooperation, which are ultimately leading to the satisfaction of the UN SDGs Goal 3 and Goal 17. Now, these policy or the vaccine diplomacy of India can be seen from two perspectives. One is the idealistic view, and another is the realistic view. So, idealistic view is saying that the India's initiative is driven by the ethical values deep-rooted in the Indian culture, thinking on the belief that the whole world is one family, that is Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. On the other hand, if we go by the realistic approach, the realists believe that India has primarily done this to obtain geopolitical edge over China in the region, because we know China has a strong influence in this particular region, in the and also to reposition its global image. Now, what happened is that due to this vaccine diplomacy and improper domestic inoculation planning by the government of India, There was a huge domestic, shortage of vaccines. If we can remember the second wave, just prior to that, there was a huge vaccine shortage, and that made Indian population vulnerable to the infections. And that led to the serious health crisis due to the second wave. We have seen soaring infections, oxygen. There was a huge shortage of oxygen, hospital beds, and the entire health system collapsed in India, and then led to a heavy criticism of the vaccine policies. And ultimately it resulted into it forced the government to restrict the export of the vaccines, which it adopted in its vaccine diplomacy program, to distribute the vaccines to the different countries and preferring neighboring countries to for the purpose of donation. And because of restrictions imposed in the export, the neighboring countries ran out of the supply, and it created an opportunity for the China to fill that particular gap by supplying adequate amount of state-owned Sinopharm vaccines. So what India tried to achieve by adopting the vaccine diplomacy initiative, initially in its realistic view to counter China and to reposition itself in front of the globe, it totally goes lost because of this kind of vaccine because of the soaring number of infections immediately after the second wave, and due to the basically due to the second wave and due to the vaccine shortage. Now we will discuss, or in the last slide, we'll discuss the game theoretic approach in this respect.
Okay. Actually, in this paper, we have critically evaluated the policy stance of the Indian government on COVID-19 vaccine in the perspective of idealism vis-a-vis realism debate in the international relations. Now, drawing lessons from the past, realist perspective states the need to protect domestic national interest over international models. And if we consider the two broad policy like vaccine nationalism and vaccine solidarity, then vaccine nationalism actually believes in realistic perspective, while the policy of vaccine solidarity is rooted in the idealistic perspective. Now here we have formulated a game, consider a formulation of the game which is played by the two symmetric donor country 1 and country 2, and they basically aimed at accelerating the pace of vaccination to lower middle income countries. Now, depending on their strategy, strategies can be idealistic, strategies can be realistic. Now, depending on their choice of the strategy, the conventional form representation of the payoff matrix is presented here. Now, if we adopt idealistic strategy, if both the countries they are adopting idealistic strategy, then ultimately it results in vaccine solidarity through cooperation. But on the other hand, if we are adopting realistic strategy, then it ultimately leads to a problem of a vaccine nationalism, and which is nothing but a non-cooperative attitude of the member countries. So these two are extreme situations. What is most common is that of a conflict-like situations where the choice of the strategy arises in two different situations. Now, next slide, please. Thank you. Now, in our model formulations, we conceptualize the case of provisioning of vaccine as a global public good. So this is a basic assumption that provisioning of vaccine is considered as a global public good. Now, depending on our strategy, countries, they are determining their level of contribution. And here the symbol SI stands for the contributions. Now, the collective benefit. Now collective benefit actually it depends on the contribution of both the countries in a social composition function. It is represented by capital B, and it is a function of it actually depends on the contribution from the country. And as usual, we assume that P prime greater than 0 and B double prime less than is equal to 0. So this is the basic standard assumption in the benefit function. Now, actually, now here we consider three simple cases of social composition function. Social composition function, actually, they are basically the technology. They are basically the technology, summation technology, weak link technology, and base short technology. So in our existing literature, on global public goods, we have three different technologies. Summation technologies, in summation technology, each country contributes. Each country contribution, and their contribution actually adds to the overall provisioning of the goods. So this is basically summation of the contributions. Now, in case of weak link technology, the overall benefit is limited to the benefit offered by the least effective provider. So least effective provider, they are actually playing a pivotal role in determining the overall benefit. So this is the mathematical expression. Similarly, we have base for technology where the overall benefit is actually determined by the most efficient provider. It is just the opposite as that of weak link technology. Now, this is all about our benefit function. Now, if we consider our cost function, then this is basically standard cost function where Ki, small ki is nothing but the marginal cost, the private cost to make a provision of the vaccine. Now, depending on the cost and the benefit, we can have our payoff functions. So this is basically a standard form of payoff functions, benefit minus cost. Now from there, you can have our Nash equilibrium. This particular pair S1, S2, they constitute a Nash equilibrium because it is mutually beneficial, or you can say mutually based replies to each other. Then it can be a Nash equilibrium in comparison to another combination of strategy like H1 prime S2. So this is a basic form of Nash equilibrium. Now, next slide, please, Sumit. Okay. Now the first order condition. Now if you want to maximize our payoff function, then the first order condition, from the first order condition, you can have marginal benefit is equal to your marginal cost. So this is basically known as a Samuelson condition for efficient provision of public goods. And now, if we diagrammatically represent marginal benefit function, then it actually presents the demand for public goods. Demand for public goods, while marginal cost, they are basically the supply of public goods under competitive market. So this is the basic representation of the problem. Now here we can derive a particular corollary. One corollary says that if we assume that the country one can, if country one can produce the vaccine at a lower marginal cost, so if K1 is less than K2, then in order to satisfy the first order condition, what is the requirement? Requirement is that marginal benefit of the first country, it should be greater than the marginal benefit of the second country. So marginal benefit provides an incentive. It provides an incentive to country one to contribute more vaccine. So ultimately it results in S1 greater than S2. So the country who are producing vaccine at a lower marginal cost, they have a higher incentive to contribute more. So this one corollary you can derive from this model. Now next slide, Sumit, please. Okay. Now let us now incorporate all of these payoffs in our normal form representation of the game. And here we consider three different technologies. In the summation technologies, we assume that the contributions made by the country are assumed as perfectly substitutable. The countries, they are perfectly substitutable. And anonymous. Why? Because their contribution adds to the same at the margin. Their contribution adds to the same at the margin, whether it can country one or country two, their contribution adds to the same at the margin. Now, ultimately, if we solve the game, then the Nash equilibrium is represented by the bold letter. In the left-hand panel, you can see the solution. Then ultimately, the Nash equilibrium corresponding to the matching level of provision. If country one follows idealistic strategy, country two will ultimately respond by following the same level of strategy. So this is all about summations. Then, if we consider weak link strategy, then we assume that there is inadequate provisioning of public goods. This can be a real life situation, inadequate provisioning of public goods, and these problem you can solve by matching behavior. That means here, how can you match the behavior if one country wants to contribute more, then it must be supplemented by the other country. So it is basically a stag hunt game, which is extensively used in international relations, and it is alternatively known as the assurance game. That where the other countries, they must have an assurance. They need an assurance that the other countries will they shall abide by the rules of the game. So if the other countries, they are following the same rule, then it provides an incentive for the country to follow the same strategy. So the matching behavior is there. So in the Nash equivalent, if we consider the diagonal element in the right-hand panel, if you consider the diagonal element, it is marked by the bold color. So what does it mean? Actually, it means that that means that countries, they are following a matching behavior. They are following a matching behavior. And if you compare in between two Nash equilibrium, that the focal equilibrium is nothing but idealistic strategy, choice of idealistic strategy by both the countries, as these payoffs actually Pareto dominates the non-contribution sales payoff. So it is basically the focal equilibrium. Now in the bottom panel, you can have a base short game theoretic approach, and here we assume that provision is adequate. Provision is adequate. That means, so if we have a vaccine club, so if we consider World Bank document, COVID vaccine club, then some of the countries, they have a control on the production, control over the input. So they are actually determining the game. So their maximum contributions is actually determining the game. And if it is so, then the other countries, they are trying to free ride. They are trying to free ride. Okay, because the largest effort is given by the donor country. Maximum contribution is there, so other countries, they are in a position to free ride. So this is basically our well-known chicken game or anti-coordinations game, where the countries, they are playing different strategies, and they are mutually beneficial. It is their mutually beneficial for them to play the different strategies. Now, next slide, please. The last one. Now, through the lens of game theoretic approach, let us now consider the case of tepid form of nationalism. Tepid form of nationalism. Now, what does it mean? Actually, we want to find out a solution, how to maintain a proper balance in order to meet our domestic as well as international demand. How to make a solution? Now the solution lies in the synthesis of optimistic view of liberalism and pessimistic view of realism. So it is in between these two. So we are synthesizing both this liberalism and optimism view. And if you follow the existing literature, then Ferguson, he proposed a tepid form of vaccine nationalism, which prioritized domestic needs without compromising the needs of the other country. So without compromising the need of the other country, we are prioritizing our domestic needs. Now, what we have done, we have included a synthesis strategy in the constellation form of the game theory, and under different technology assumptions. So you have summation, you have weak link, you have base short. So under 3 different technology assumptions, we have included synthesis strategy in the constellation form of the game. Now, if we consider that, what is the basic understanding? Basic understanding is that if there is inadequate provision of public goods, if there is inadequate provision, then it ultimately calls for matching behavior. It ultimately calls for matching behavior from the other country. Now, if you consider summation technology, if you consider weak link technology, then you can find out that there is a case of matching behavior. The collective action in the form of adopting synthesis and idealistic strategy is more pronounced in weak link than summation-based technology. So tepid form of solution, that means the synthesis strategy, it can be a Nash equilibrium in case of weak link strategy. So it is represented by the diagonal element of the matrix. Now, if you consider the base short technology, then either country 1 and country 2 makes the largest effort. One country makes the effort, and other country, they are in a position to free ride the situations. Now, what is relations for our country? What can be the relations? So it is also imperative for the country, our country, to safeguard our own population by trying to save the world. Now, how can it possible? It can be possible by ramping up the production of vaccine, by making huge investment We can think of voluntary licensing provisions, speeding up the domestic inclusion process, and there is a need for greater cooperation. Either it can be in the form of South-South cooperation, or it can be in the form of South-South triangular cooperation. Last of all, following who Director General, we can say that we can either win the game together or we can lose together. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, sir.
Thank you, Arindam. Now I invite Sandra Nandakumar for discussing the paper.
Hi, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
So I really did enjoy the paper. It was really well written, but I had a couple of doubts, clarifications, and a couple of notes essentially. So I think the first thing is pretty much, I think the discussion of the incentives for vaccine diplomacy were pretty well explained, essentially, like from both the idealistic and the realistic point of view. But I felt like what drives vaccine nationalism was pretty much just glossed over, and that wasn't really well I mean, sure, it doesn't really need to be well explained considering you're talking about India, but I feel like it was kind of glossed over and could just be better explained, so that it's not that the countries are just doing it just because they want to, for a little slightly better background. Secondly, I think the double usage of the term realism is kind of confusing in the paper. So I think initially you say that, okay, India follows vaccine diplomacy, and that can be explained from two perspectives, an idealistic perspective of the world is one family and a realistic perspective of geopolitical presence. And then later, during the game theoretic approach parts, it's explained that if a country is following a realistic approach, then they would follow vaccine nationalism, which technically doesn't make sense because a few paragraphs ago you just explained that vaccine diplomacy can have realistic reasons as well. So I think slightly differentiating between those two would be kind of a little more helpful in the flow. And I think lastly, in terms of, and this is just specific to the actual full paper itself and not the presentation, I felt that the actual game theoretic part of it was again just kind of rushed through. There was a lot of discussion on the actual policies and on the actual approaches, which was really simple to follow, but also effective in explaining all of the ideas. But the actual game theoretic part, I felt was just wrapped up with it's similar to Endgame. And I feel either maybe explaining Endgame, the stag hunt game or the chicken game, or whatever other game you've chosen to compare it to, might help make that a little clearer for someone who's reading your paper as their first reference. That's about it.
Thank you, Sandra. Now you can respond to the questions and observations. So
I had one question. Can I?
Yeah, sure, you can.
Okay, thank you. It was a very interesting, presentation. So I need one clarification is that as the author told that ultimately the main focus is towards the matching behavior of the partners who are producing the vaccine. I am saying the question is that so far as every country will not reveal it is what is its efficient level of vaccine production and what is its technological efficiency. So that will create an asymmetric information problem in an economy. So that will not lead to national equilibrium. So how the author looks that situation into this present study?
Okay. Okay. Let me clarify some of the doubts raised by our honorable discussion, ma'am. Actually, am I audible? Can you hear me?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay. So here we have considered two different strategies, actually three different strategies. One is idealistic, second one realistic, and third one is synthesis in between realistic and idealistic. Now, if you consider the literature, actually we have considered these three different strategies from the existing literature on international relations. And if you consider the historical precedents, then learning from the experience of the World War I, idealistic view was dominated in the existing literature. So if you consider the existing literature on international relations, then learning from the experience of World War I, idealistic view was dominated in the existing literature. in the 1920s or in the early 30s. Now there was a shift in the ideology stand. When it happens? It happens in the wake of Great Depression. In the wake of Great Depression in the 1930s and in the 1940s, the idealistic doctrine was replaced by the realistic. So this was the period. So after the Great Depression, what we have seen that this approach, idealistic approach, it was replaced by the realistic approach. And later on, if we consider the recent trend, then the realistic view was also challenged by the behavioralism. It is recently it was also challenged by the behavioralism. Now what we assume that in contrast to our normative, idealistic perspective, realistic perspective states the need to protect national interest. Okay, so it is their basic observation, how to protect our national interest. So ultimately for our own survival. So this is the matter of concern. Ultimately for our own survival, what can be done? So from there, we have an approach like vaccine nationalism. So as you mentioned, that what drives vaccine nationalism, it drives from the idea of realistic perspective. Now, if we consider by criticizing the universal moralism of idealistic stand. So idealist believes in international morals. So universal moralism is there in their opinion. So realists, they are criticizing this particular stand, international moral stand, and they believes in moral relativism. So in relations to global standard, what can be our stand? So depending on their positions, ultimately you can have two different approaches. One can be vaccine nationalism, another can be vaccine solidarity. So even though these terms, realism, idealism, they can be confused, they can bring some confusion. But if you gone through the existing literature on international relations, then this sort of idea is there. So we have gone through some of the literature, and therefrom we have developed the idea. Now as you mentioned, that in the constellation representation of the game, we have considered three different strategies. So summation. So if you consider the summation technology, then it is the most widely used assumptions. Relating to the provision of public goods. But if you gone through the article written by Hitchlifer, then he considered two other strategies like weak link and base short strategy. Okay, and as you mentioned that these strategies, these two technologies, somehow it should be linked to our common sense view. So we are all aware of stack and game. We are all aware of chicken game. So from our classroom lecture, we have some basic understanding of the representation of the game. So somehow we have tried to link them. Somehow we have tried to link our own formulation to our common sense game representation form. So weak link technology, it can be linked to the stack hand game. And if we consider our international relations problem like international treaty, environmental regulations, then this stack hand game is extensively used. So Gibbons, we are aware of the book written by Gibbons. So Gibbons, he has also written an article that how can use the game theory in international relations. So this stack hand game is extensively used in international treaty and environmental regulations. Okay, and if you consider the base short technology, then again we have linked our model to our common sense view. We have some basic understanding of chicken game. We have some basic understanding of basic anti-coordination game. We have some basic understanding, and we know that it is mutually beneficial for the countries to play different strategies. So somehow we have linked these two technology with our common sense view, with our classroom teaching. somehow we have linked our game with our common sense view. Now, regarding the third question, as said, you have mentioned that that if we follow our weak link technology, weak link technology and summation technology, actually these two technology, actually what we assume that that there is an inadequate provision. There is an inadequate provision. So summation technology and weak link technology, they presume that there is an inadequate provision of public goods, okay, and it can be solved by the matching behavior. So matching behavior, how can it solve? So suppose a country wants to contribute more, then it may provide a disincentive. It may provide a disincentive to the country who are adopting idealistic strategy unless a favorable response from the other country. So if the other country do not respond, then the country who wants to adopt idealistic strategy, they will unduly incur cost. They will unduly incur cost of financing without any gain in terms of collective benefit. So ultimately, what is the solution of the game? Solution lies in the matching behavior. If the players, they are following the same behavior, then only you can solve the game. And here, as you rightly mentioned, that there is a role of asymmetric information, how they can know. Also, basically, what here in this model we have considered simultaneous game theoretical model. There is no such sequential game theoretical model. Okay, so we shall take into account your suggestion set that if you consider that there is some asymmetric, how can the other country, how can they be sure that the other country will follow the same strategy? So otherwise you cannot derive this particular mass equilibrium. So you have rightly mentioned that asymmetric problem is there, and this problem can be solved by sequential choice model, or there can be another way out. So if the game is played repeatedly, then you can solve the asymmetric problem. Then it may lead to a cooperative response, as nations can retaliate by adopting the same strategy. And in our existing literature, we know that there is a tit for tat strategy.
Sir, let me interfere. Sorry.
Oh, sorry,
as you told that nations can follow the suit of one nation as compared to another nation when he has adopted some technology in development of a vaccine. So until and unless the nation will not derive the total profits from the development of and production of the vaccine, that nation cannot reveal its technological efficiency to another nation.
Sorry for the interruption. Here the technology, by the term technology, we mean an altogether different conditions. Altogether different connotation. This is basically a technology which is derived from social consumption function. Actually, the countries, their contribution, they are making contribution. Now, how can you cumulate the contributions? So depending on this idea, we have developed a technology. So technology for the production of vaccine, it is not there.
Ultimately,
so in our social production function, it actually it depends on different possible ways of amalgamating individual contribution. How can you amalgamate different contributions, individual contributions, into social availability of public goods? So in this sense, we have used the term technology. Yes, sir. Please.
Sir, please. Ultimately, the thing is that they look towards the graph, as you told that it should be marginal benefit is greater than marginal cost. So ultimately, it is the condition of profitability, we can say, in the economy. So every producer can look into the profitability condition, and being this profitability condition into the notion, he cannot reveal his technological backup which he has gained through the production, or which he has, we can say it is an novice know-how it has, so as to produce some vaccine which will be highly efficient as compared to other vaccines which are produced by n number of countries in the economy.
So actually we have made one policy suggestion that there is a consideration of you can consider a case of voluntary licensing. So your technology, it is known to you. It may not be known to the other countries. So if you follow the World Bank report, then it is basically a case of a vaccine production club. So they have a control. They have a control. So some of the countries like US, European Union, Japan, China, Switzerland, you have rightly mentioned that they have a control over final vaccine producers and vaccine ingredients producers. Okay, they have a control over final producers. They have connections with producers and connections with the raw material, that means ingredients. So they are controlling the situation. So ultimately, so if they are producing the vaccine at a lower cost, then if they are producing the vaccine at a lower cost, then there can be a higher marginal benefit. You have rightly mentioned that there can be a higher marginal benefit, and higher marginal benefit can provide an incentive. It can provide you an incentive to supply more. It can provide you the incentive to supply more. So if it is so, then ultimately it gives you a signal that ultimately there is a case of base for technology. So the countries who are producing vaccine in a larger quantity at a lower cost, they are in a position to make maximum contribution. And if they are making a maximum contribution, then the other countries, there is a possibility to free ride. There is a possibility to free ride. So these cases can be linked to the base short technology. And as you rightly mentioned, that relating to technology and its dissemination, knowledge dissemination, you can opt for voluntary licensing. Instead of compulsory licensing, there can be a provision of voluntary licensing. So these can be one of our policy suggestions.
Sir,
Yeah.
hello, sir. Sir, being one of the co-authors, sir, I want to add one thing, sir. So joining in this club as a voluntarily, there is an economic benefit also, because during this pandemic, these countries, mostly the developed countries, they have lost their export market, particularly to those, particularly in the African countries. Suppose consider the case of Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, or like this one. In this case, if we don't participate in this vaccine club, in the near future, we may lost our export market also. So ultimately, when the social consumption functions has been derived in our paper, when we have introduced this paper, we have taken this into account, because these countries, that is those who are the developed one, initially they have go for a vaccine nationalism policies, but they will be forced to participate in this vaccine policies, vaccine club, so that can be distributed freely to the other countries also. On the basis of this idealistic policies, that particular strategy has been taken in our paper.
And one more thing I would just like to add, that in case of provision.
Yeah.
Can
you please move ahead? I think we are already at 5:12:13 right now, and 2 papers has been completed. We have to finish by 5:40, if you don't mind.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.
It's been a great paper, theoretical contributions, and of course I also have some observations, like what kind of market structure you preferred when you set up the game theory and all that. We can still discuss about it in a long chat. But 2 more papers are going to be presented, so I would like to request if we can continue for the 3rd paper.
Thank you, sir. Okay, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much. So Anand, can I please request for the 3rd paper to be presented?
Yeah, the 3rd paper is Estimating Monetary Policy Transmission and Empirical Analysis from India by Sayara Bansha.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Hello.
Yes, sir, audible.
Am I audible, sir?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you, sir. Is it visible on my presentation?
Yes.
Okay, thank you everyone for giving me an opportunity to present my paper. The paper which I have chosen is Testing Monetary Policy Transmission and Empirical Analysis from India for the post-reform period. So I'll be discussing this paper under the different headings. First, I'll be discussing introduction, and followed by that, I'll be discussing the literature review, and I'll be discussing the objectives, and followed by methodology and results and discussions. Followed by that, I'll be discussing certain policy recommendations. First, what monetary policy is all about. Monetary policy is the policy which is dealt with the supply of money maintenance of money supply liquidity into an economy, so as to maintain the stable price levels and stable economic growth. So supply of money is the first component which is under the purview of the monetary policy. Second is the cost of money or the rate of interest which we are seeing. Cost of money is the we can say what is the amount of cost you have to pay when you are holding a monetary unit. We can say availability of money also determines the main function of the monetary policy, how much liquidity there is into an economy. And all these three components are supplement they can supplement with the how to maintain the stable growth in an economy. That stable growth can be maintained through the help of stable price levels. So that this is the working mechanism of monetary policy. Like when there is a change in the policy rate, it affects the short-term monetary market, and that could have an effect on the interest rate and that could affect the financial markets and bond markets. That could also affect the deposit lending rates. And monetary policy can affect the economic system through different channels. Like we have asset price channels, like we have exchange rate channel, we have credit channel, and we have expectation channel. And that could have in turn microeconomic effects, like it could affect the consumption of the private household, or it could also affect the consumption of the public, that is government. It could also have an effect, whether positive or negative, on the investment. That could also affect the net exports. And finally, that could have an impact on the aggregate demand. That is the goal of the how to maintain economic growth. So far as the monetary policy is concerned, I'll be giving some reformative background or historical perspective of the monetary policy. Like if you go reformers, we will see that different committees and commissions have been formulated. The main objective of formulation of these committees was to check whether there is efficiency in the monetary policy so far as the conduct or operating procedure of monetary policy is concerned. So in the pre-reform period, like different commissions in terms of 1985 commission of Chakravarti committee, that recommended that there should be complete reformulation of the monetary policy, because inflation was at a very high level at that point of time. During the pre-reform period till new millennium, 2000, certain reforms were implemented, and there were multiple indicator approach was implemented into the monetary policy. And so far as the post-reform is concerned, different committees also were set up into the monetary policy system. And like we have Raghuram Rajan committee and Urjit Patel committee, they recommended that monetary policy should employ some efficient mechanisms that could be in consonance with the world economies prevailing prevailing around the globe. And they implemented certain reforms in terms of flexible inflation targeting into an economy. And flexible inflation targeting, which is currently in Yog. So what is the motive of implementing the flexible inflation targeting was that economy was affected highly so far as the inflation is concerned. If we look at the trend of the inflation, we will see that the inflation is hovering around 10 and 4 we can say corridor, and we can say these forces push the monetary policy to adopt some targeting approach that could be targeted, and that could be we can say achieved within some specified time. So how the monetary policy transmission mechanism works? There are different channels so far as the monetary transmission is concerned. And as Michigan 1996 puts that there is an interest rate channel. An interest rate channel works through that when there is an increase in the broad money supply, it can affect the rate of interest. That could in turn affect the level of investment, and that could have an impact on the aggregate demand. Similarly, there is exchange rate channel. That increase in the expansionary monetary policy can have a negative impact on the rate of interest. That could have a positive impact on the exports, and that could have a positive impact on the net exports as well, and it can have a positive impact on the investment, and finally it could have a positive impact on the aggregate demand as well. Similarly, there is asset price channel. That in expansionary monetary policy can have a negative impact on the rate of interest. That could increase the wealth of the individuals, or the wealth of the asset holders, and that could have a positive impact on the investment of an economy, and that could contribute positively to the aggregate demand as well. And finally, we have the bank credit channel. As a result of expansionary monetary policy, there could be a fall in the rate of interest, and that could have a positive impact on the bank credit, and it will augment the investment to finally have a positive impact on the aggregate demand. So this is the transmission channels which are interlinked, or which are provided in this diagram. So far as the literature survey is concerned, our work is motivated by the Friedman 1986-68 paper, who considered that role of monetary policy and macroeconomic stabilization is an inconclusive issue. So our work was motivated by this. So we try to underline what is the effect of monetary policy in this reformative context. So far as the theoretical background is concerned, there are different schools of thought which propose what is the effect of monetary policy into the on macroeconomic variables. Like classical school of thought proposes that expansionary monetary policy is inflationary so far as the full employment is concerned. And there is a Keynesian school of thought which proposes that monetary variable plays an important role for determining the macroeconomic variables. And there is some empirical literature which has been done into the analysis. So I will skip this. So there are research gaps which our study try to address. First research gap is adoption of targeting framework accentuated the need to investigate the effectiveness of monetary policy transmission analysis, because flexible inflation targeting is very new into the it has been adopted in 2016. So we try to add to the existing literature whether the effectiveness of monetary policy is what is the effectiveness of monetary policy in the contemporary periods. Studies conducted in the Indian context are less contributory given their partial empirical analysis. Like these studies have been done, they have taken partial analysis, they have taken either one channel or second channel, or they have partially done the analysis. That is why our study supplements these studies that we have done the analysis of all the 4 channels into our study. Empirical literature doesn't fully address the implications of transmission mechanism in case of emerging economies, given the reason that most of the emerging economies have adopted flexible inflationary targeting in the contemporary periods. There is no unanimous consent on the precise working of monetary policy, because it is established that monetary policy or monetary mechanism works in a black box analysis. So what is happening through an impulse on the macroeconomic variable, that is not fully yet efficiently explored. So our study is motivated by the objective that we try to examine the monetary policy transmission analysis during the post-reform period. We proposed the hypothesis that monetary policy transmission mechanism across channels remains constant during the post-reform period. So we, so far as the methodology is concerned, we adopted the path analysis, that is the extended version of correlation analysis. We try to examine the association between dependent and independent variables and the interdependent variables as well. This is the diagrammatic representation of the path analysis. And path analysis, the crux of the path analysis is that it tries to examine the total effect which is measured by direct effect and the indirect effect which are operating into these channels. So this is the path analysis diagram. So far the variables are concerned, we try to have a couple of variables, like our data ranges from 1991 to 2009. Our variables constitute the exchange rate, net exports, rate of interest, bank credit, level of investment, asset prices, and level of consumption. From the monetary policy side, we took the broad money M3 as the target variable. And why we selected these variables? Because these are the variables which are operating in the transmission channels of monetary policy. So far as the data sources are concerned, our data sources have been derived from different databases. Like we consulted the Reserve Bank of India database on the Indian economy. We consulted Central Statistical Office, Ministry of Statistics Program Implementation, where from we collected the data regarding the GDP, consumption, investment, and net exports. We collected the data from the International Financial Statistics regarding the rate of interest. We collected the data from the EPW Research Foundation regarding the bank credit. We collected the data for the asset price from the Bombay Stock Exchange. So far as the results are concerned, our first result is that exchange rate transmission channel predominates in the monetary policy transmission mechanism for the post-reform period with a total effect of 1.3%. This presumes that if there is 1% change in the monetary money supply, it affects the GDP, or we can say aggregate demand, by about 1.23%. So far as the second result is concerned, exchange rate channel is followed by the asset price channel with a total effect of 1.0 to 1% in determining the monetary policy transmission. Credit channel plays least role related to the other channels in the monetary policy transmission mechanism for the post-reform period with a total effect of 1.02%. Interest rate channel also has a predominant impact related to the credit channels in monetary policy transmission with a value of 1.21%. So from this results, we can conclude that market-oriented oriented channels play an important role in the monetary policy transmission during the post-reform period. This is the result table. So I'll skip this. So we will derive certain policy implications from the analysis that because the credit channel is very weak, so we recommend that there should be incorporation of varied maturity instruments. So when the monetary policy will include portfolio of maturity instruments, it will supplement the credit channel of the monetary policy to make it more efficient as compared to other in comparison to other channels. There should be a unanimous setting of interest rate because currently if we see the scenario of the monetary policy, they are adopting certain targets, like sometimes they target the price levels, sometimes they target the interest rate. So there is portfolio of targets which is with the monetary policy. So we recommend that there should be a unanimous key target, which is the target rate for before the monetary policy to increase its efficiency. So operational autonomy of the monetary policy with enhanced independence. So we recommend that monetary policy should be autonomous as much as possible, because autonomy of the monetary policy will help it to take the decisions as per its relevance without affecting through any other authority. There should be complete delinking of the monetization of public debt by making it freely market oriented, because when there is linking of the monetization of public debt, like we can say public debt is linked with the monetary policy, then there becomes a responsibility for the monetary policy to cover the debts which has been raised by the fiscal authorities. That is why we recommend that it should be completely delinked so as to make the credit channel more efficient as compared to other channels. So selection of the top management for the Apex Monetary Authority should be based on domain expertise. Here we recommend that so far as the Monetary Policy Committee is concerned, which is a committee of 6 members, the selection of these should be based on the expertise knowledge or knowledge regarding the economy. The people will be selected only from the area which have the domain knowledge of these things. And we should inculcate into the public masses the formal banking habit, so that we could increase the credit channel. I mean, we could enhance the effectiveness of the credit channel in comparison to other channels as well. And so far as the exchange rate is concerned, there currently some research papers show that we don't have the completely flexible exchange rate. That is, we have some floating exchange rate. So I recommend that there should be flexibility of exchange rate so as to increase further operational effectiveness of the exchange rate policy and to increase the monetary policy transmission mechanism. Thanks to all for listening this presentation.
Thank you, Saya. Now I welcome the discussant, Sanchita Mandal. Sanchita, are you there? I think Sanchita is not here. Sorry, Sanhita. Sanhita Mandal. Sanhita, are you there? Sanhita Mandal? Yes, okay. Just. Yeah, now you can speak.
Yeah, so I just want to ask this question. That recently the Federal Reserve System, it has reduced the interest rate, by 0.25%. So how will it affect India and its mechanism? Because it wasn't mentioned in the paper. So how will it affect?
Okay. So a decrease in the interest rate, that a fall in the interest rate can have an expansionary effect on the through the monetary policy and on the macroeconomic variables. So when there is an expansionary monetary policy if we talk in terms of COVID-19, expansionary monetary policy can contribute to the aggregate demand so far as the sales law is concerned, that supply creates its own demand, and in the reverse we can say demand creates its own supply. So augmentation of the aggregate demand can have a positive impact on the we can say GDP of a country.
Any other questions?
Yeah, so from Sanhita only, so we all been through a rough phase due to COVID. we all know that the Indian financial market, it has been quite dynamic in the past 2 years. So what do you think? How asymmetric is the monetary policy transmission to these markets?
Okay, thank you. It is a very good question. So we can say there is a huge volatility in the Indian financial markets because all the financial markets are disrupted so far as the current pandemic is concerned. So the major role in this COVID-19 pandemic for the monetary policy is to maintain a balance with regard to the whether it is on the one side it is going to enhance the aggregate demand through expansionary monetary policy measures. On the other hand, it has to cover the inflation. I mean, it has to maintain the stable inflation, keeping in view the monetary policy committee recommendations, or to keeping in view the target rate of interest inflation into an economy. So monetary policy is currently in the pandemic passing through a very tough phase, we can say. On the one hand, it has to stabilize the inflation. On the other hand, it has to augment the aggregate demand. That will have a positive impact. If monetary policy is going to have a success in this endeavor, then it will have a positive impact to minimize the volatility in the stock markets so far as the current volatility in the pandemic is concerned.
Any more questions?
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Now,
yeah. Any other questions?
Hello, Sire. It was a very nice paper. Just I have two queries. First,
yes, please.
that in case of any time series, the number of data points are very important, as we all know.
Yes.
So based on only 28 data points, which is considered to be a very small sample, can you make these policy suggestions?
Yes.
And secondly, before performing any kind of or dealing with time series data, some standard time series testings are very important.
Yes.
Without conducting those tests, can you go for path analysis? And thirdly, that when you have discussed your paper, you have only just mentioned the outcomes, that this effect is positive, this effect is negative. However, the logical explanations seems a little bit missing. So can you just clarify these three points?
Okay. Thank you, sir. So first, as you told that 20 data pointers are necessary to carry out the time series. As I mentioned that we have done the MOS analysis, analysis through the help of MOS. So in the MOS, what happens when we run the data in the software, it normalizes the data there. So in case of MOS, there is no
normally whenever we use the time
yes,
series
yes,
data, even
yes,
if
yes.
it is for a month,
I got your
data, we use normalization. So normalization is not a thing. Normalization.
See, the question, like if you see them, if you see towards my results, there are standardized coefficients. So in the standardized coefficients, what we are taking is that when the data is normalized in the MOS, it takes care of the whether data is very less or data is very high. That doesn't matter in the MOS analysis. So this is one of the assumption when we are running the analysis through the LPAC. So because it is a multi-equation system, we are carrying out the structural we are carrying out analysis in a structural analysis framework.
So structural analysis, this framework is mainly suitable to the cross-sectional data framework. So can you use this?
No, sir. When we have a channel analysis, there is a direct as well as indirect effect and intermediate indirect effect. So it creates a condition of web-like situation. So web-like situation that is dealt within the structural equation framework. Regarding the second question, regarding the test, yes, so time series test, so far as the time series, like you were talking of stationary, so when we are normalizing the data, there is no need to carry out the stationary tests into the analysis so far as the structural equation model is concerned.
Sir, I think on this point you are a little bit wrong, because if you see the literature on stock prices and other this kind of macroeconomic works, everyone takes normalize, everyone perform this normalization, but yet as we see the literature, there are requirements of this kind of testing. So I think you should be conducting this.
I got your point, sir. Yes.
Yeah. Dr. Sumit, they are very important points, and Sire, please note down these points, which are definitely important in addressing the basic econometrics questions on the sample size to the recent tools and techniques of econometrics.
Yes.
In fact, I'm very happy that you have used LaTeX as one of the Beamer has the presentation file, which is interesting actually. So with this, I wish if it's a physical one, you could have discussed more. But let us keep it here, and you please do interact with each other to get the questions so that the paper becomes good. And I now invite the last paper of today. And the presenter is, I think, Nivedita Sinha, if I'm not wrong. Yeah. On green premium or operational synergy, evidence from merger and acquisition in renewable energy sector in India.
So I'll be hello, I'm Sandra, and I'll be presenting instead of Dr. Nivedita Sinha.
Of course. Please go ahead.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yes, please.
Yes. So good afternoon, everyone. I am Sandra Nandakumar, a student of the Department of Economics and Finance at BITS Pilani, Hyderabad campus. And I will be presenting the paper Green Premium or Operational Synergy, Evidence from M&As in the Renewable Energy Sector in India, which has been authored by Dr. Nivedita Sinha from the Department of Economics and Finance and myself. So this paper essentially attempts to analyze the value effects of green M&As and investigate the presence of a green premium in India through the event study methodology. So in this presentation, I will take you through the motivation, data sources, methodology, and finally have a discussion of the results and conclusions from our work. I just want to clarify, has the slide changed for everyone?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So currently, India is the third largest renewable energy producer with $90 billion of renewable energy capacity investment over the last decade. So in 2020, 38% of India's electricity was from renewable sources, and the government is aiming to increase this to 57% by 2022. So the country requires an additional $450 billion of capital to reach its 2040 target of 480 gigawatts and $50 billion to reach its 2022 target of achieving a capacity of 227 gigawatts. So if we look at mergers and acquisitions in the sector in 2020, even amid COVID-19, India still saw a 75% increase in the value of merger and acquisition transactions in the calendar year, amounting to a grand total of $2 billion US, and it was also voted the 7th most popular country for FDI in the sector. In 2020, Ernst & Young ranked the country the 4th most attractive destination for overall clean energy investment and the most attractive investment location of the photovoltaic market. So part of this growth can be attributed to the underpinning government support, as the government is aggressively trying to meet their target of 57% of renewable energy generation by 2022. But why are firms interested in mergers and acquisitions in the first place? So mergers and acquisitions play a crucial role in achieving sustainable growth and innovation in a fast-changing sector like renewable energy. And the 4 major reasons for green mergers and acquisitions are synergy effects, increased market power, risk diversification, and green premiums. So starting with the synergy effect, it arises when 2 companies combine and produce an impact that is greater than the sum of the firm's individual values. And so the synergy effect, you can further classify it as operational synergy or financial synergy. So financial synergy is essentially like the reduction of capital costs due to the increase in size of the firm. And operational synergy essentially occurs when both firms share their production processes or their human resources. So logically, operation synergy is specific to when the target and the acquirer are within the same industry. So if you had a solar M&A or a wind M&A, and this type of deal for the rest of the presentation is also referred to as a homogeneous M&A. So homogeneous M&As allow the merged company to gain increased market power through the M&A, through the expansion of the firm's scale, or through securing exclusive profits by restricting competition. The third reason for M&As in the sector is risk diversification. So the M&As effectively reduce the risk inherent in highly volatile industries like small renewable energy firms, thus making these M&As advantages for the target firms. And the last major reason in the sector is particularly relevant when the acquirer firm is not engaged in renewable energy itself, is the idea of a green premium, which is a phenomenon that environmentally oriented companies are perceived more positively and thus less vulnerable to social crises. So in India specifically, the most common motivations for green M&A were Indian renewable energy firms expanding into other states or foreign renewable energy firms entering the Indian market. The other commonly found reason was companies entering to meet their green energy needs, which suggests that there might be a green premium in this market. So the objective of this paper is firstly to analyze the change in the market value of the target and acquirer firm during green mergers and acquisitions, which essentially indicates market perception of these events using the event study methodology, and additionally also investigate the presence of a green premium by analyzing the reaction of the market to oil, utility, or non-energy firms essentially merging with renewable energy firms. And furthermore, the paper also analyzes the difference in reactions of the target and acquirer firms based on their industry and whether deals between companies of the same industry or homogeneous deals are valued significantly differently from non-homogeneous deals. So in order to analyze the impact of the green M&As in India, we have a sample of M&A deals from 2004 to 2020 from the Venture Intelligence M&A database. So we have information about the deal date, the firms involved, etc. So the major drawback of using the event study methodology is that you can only use firms where the firm is listed so that you can use the public price points. So these are like other details about like what the data set that we're dealing with. So there are 171 total M&As in this period, 60 were in one, and of these, but there are only 60 where like either the acquirer or the target firm is listed, and therefore we can actually use it. 8 where they were homogeneous, and 35 where both the firms were within India. So I'll move on to the methodology. With the information of the dates and the companies involved in the mergers and acquisitions of our interest, we are in a position to use the event study methodology in order to compute the economic effect of these mergers. So the event study methodology essentially relies on the computation of two metrics, the abnormal returns and the cumulative abnormal returns during the event window. So the abnormal returns, as the name suggests, is essentially the difference between the actual returns and the estimated returns, whereas the cumulative abnormal returns is simply the sum of the abnormal returns over a chosen event window. So in our case, when the focus of study is multiple entities or multiple events, since we're looking at multiple M&As, you, instead of taking the abnormal return, the cumulative abnormal return, you essentially take the averages of these values. So now the question comes, how do we exactly estimate these returns? So to estimate the returns, we used a generalized autoregressive conditionally heteroscedastic model, or the GRC model, because it essentially allows us to vary the volatility close to the event. Traditionally in the event study methodology, an OLS model is often used, but it fails to account for the varying volatility, especially close to the event. So many studies have shown that the volatility of financial variables lasts for a long time, and thus the simple GRC 1-1 model holds well, and thus is chosen for the estimation of the expected returns. And finally, we use the Patel's Z statistic, which is immune to the pattern in which the abnormal returns are distributed over the event window, to determine whether our car values are statistically significant or not. So for the acquirer firms overall, for the shorter event windows, the car value was found to be positive, but for the 31-day event window, the cumulative reaction was found to be negative. However, none of the reactions were found to be statistically significant. Once we group the acquirers by industry, for the wind and solar industry, as well as utility firms and non-energy firms, no significant reactions were found, though the reaction for the utility firms is consistently negative across all the event windows. For firms engaged in multiple renewable energy projects, the car value is found to be positive across all of the event windows. And for firms engaged in the oil and gas industry as well, the reaction is found to be negative across all of the event windows. So now, if we group them by the homogeneity, we have 3 classes essentially. A homogeneous deal is one in which both the acquirer and the target are essentially from the same industry. And within non-homogeneous is further broken down into non-homogeneous energy, where the target may just be in a where both the firms are in the energy sector, but might just be in different industries. And finally, non-homogeneous, where the acquirer is essentially a non-energy firm. And so for acquirer firms within the energy sector that engage in non-homogeneous deals, the car value across all event windows was weakly positive. For those that engaged in homogeneous deals, the car value was found to be positive across all the event windows. And for non-energy firms, there was found to be no significant results. So furthermore, the difference between the reactions of the acquirer firms involved in homogeneous M&As and non-homogeneous M&As was found to be statistically significant at the 5% significance level for the 3-day event window, with an estimated difference calculated as 3.26%. So moving on, we look at the reactions of the listed target firms to an M&A announcement. So across both shorter and longer event windows, the reaction was found to be positive and significant for a 31-day, 7-day, as well as for a 3-day window. So when grouped by the industry of the acquirer firms, firms that were acquired by firms engaged in multiple renewable energy projects and non-energy firms saw statistically significant positive reaction, whereas those acquired by the solar industry saw no significant reaction. It is worth noting here that since there were very few deals where the target firm was listed, all the industries have not been able to be represented in this case. So when grouped by the homogeneity of the deal, target firms engaged in homogeneous deals are found to have a positive car value across all event windows. And for target firms engaged in deals wherein the acquirer firm was in the energy sector, but not the same industry, the car value is found to be significantly positive for some of the event windows. And for target firms that were acquired by non-energy firms, the car value was found to be positive across all of the event windows. And the reaction is found to be significantly positive for the 31-day and the 3-day, for the 31-day and the 3-day event window. So the difference between the reactions of the target firms involved in homogeneous M&As and non-homogeneous M&As was not found to be statistically significant in any of the considered event windows. So based on these results, we can essentially infer that while significant reactions were not found for the acquirer firms overall, target firms reacted significantly positively. And we also find that deals where acquirer companies deal with multiple renewable energy projects are valued much higher in the market than other sectors on the announcements of M&As. Additionally, the significantly negative reaction of oil and gas acquirer firms suggests that the green premium effect might not be as prevalent in the Indian market, which may affect the renewable energy investment in India. And finally, we find investors of both acquirer firms and target firms value homogeneous deals more than heterogeneous deals, suggesting that investors perceive a benefit from a merger and acquisition based on synergies due to operating efficiencies, economies of scale, or higher market power. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Dr. Anand, I think there is a message by Dr. Subir Kumar Sen.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. Now
Dr. Sen, before you get into your comments and suggestions, I just have one query in this paper.
Yes.
And then I will allow, I request you to allow me before, So I just want to know how the idea of green M&A and, can be implied in Indian market conditions when we have large scale of investment in the coal industries, and which is largely by the public sectors, and recently it has been getting into a PPP mode. So that is my only concern. I don't need an answer right now. I will please allow Dr. Subir Kumar Sen to ask questions and his observations on the paper. And please, Dr. Sen, please.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for giving me the opportunity to act as a discussant of this paper. However, I have certain observations on the article that may help to strengthen the epistemological basis of the research. First of all, the author may write how the research contribute in the extant literature. That is the significance of the study. Number two, as author has framed two hypotheses and written in separate section called central hypothesis. I'm talking about the paper, what I have gone through that one, and on the basis of this presentation. Albeit it has details readers to understand the essence of framing these hypotheses. Authors may write each of the hypotheses below the relevant literature so that academic audience can understand the basis of framing that hypothesis. It's just my suggestion. Another one is that the list of firms merged during the study period may be mentioned in an appendix so that reader can understand that what are the firms that has been taken. Another one is that the event study method normally complemented by control company methodology. The increase or decrease in the stock price may be due to other industry specific or macroeconomic variables coinciding with the M&A event. Thus, in order to explore the true effect of M&A event on stock price, control companies should also be tested for the same period. Another one is that the announcement date is considered to be the event date. However, in reality, the news of possible M&A comes in market much before the announcement date. And another one is that I have gone through that paper and find that in the paper it is mentions that operational efficiency, economies of scale, and market power are the determinants of value creation, probably due to synergistic effect. However, such propositions has not been tested explicitly in this particular paper. Moreover, the operational efficiency gain due to M&A can be tested in a better way through accounting data for pre and post M&A event. And finally, in the concluding remarks, the author may add general conclusions, that is limitations, practical implications of the research, and future research endeavors to make the article more comprehensive. This is my observations. However, you are free whether to take this one or not. And finally, I wish all the best to the authors for this insightful paper. So this is simply my observations. You are free to take whether you can accommodate this one or not. But I think this may help to improve this one and maybe make this publishable, convert this in a publishable form, sir. Thank you, sir.
Dr. Sahil, you're still muted.
Santosh, Dr. Santosh.
I'm on mute, sorry. So thank you for the comments. I would like to request the presenter to respond to the queries raised by the discussant.
Hi. So I think I'll just start with the first thing, which was why consider green M&As when there's still heavy investment in coal in India. So I think this was like better elaborate in the paper. So the presentation I cut it due to the time. So technically the reason that green M&As are now becoming relevant is essentially because India is trying to move like under the Paris Agreement and like because of like the relevance of climate change, India is trying to move more towards renewable energy, and the government does have very ambitious targets for hitting like 38% to 57% of renewable energy generation. So in this case, so it is because the government is fairly aggressively moving towards these targets that renewable energy becomes like a hotter sector in India. And as soon as that starts to happen, other countries are interested in entering India's green energy sector. And in that case, one of the most effective ways that they go through that process is through M&As. And additionally, because of government supports with the industry growing, like in general, smaller firms, and there are a various number of reasons for M&As, but essentially because of the growth of the sector, M&As also by extension become important. Dr. San, thank you so much for all of your comments. I found a lot of them like extremely helpful and insightful. With respect to a lot of them are like I will take into account and like will discuss with my co-author and try to add a lot of them. I think the one that was particularly I found was central, like adding like the central hypothesis, the literature sources right about that. So I think the reason that we kept a separate section for the central hypothesis is because in the literature review, the relevant papers are kind of split into those paragraphs. But we thought that the paper would have more direction by having the central hypothesis just reiterated for the sake of before getting into the methodology. Apart from that, I found all of your comments extremely insightful, and thank you so much for taking the time to actually go.
Thank you, madam.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for the responses of the discussions that you have, fairly covered all the questions. And Anand, probably this gives me a pleasure to kind of invite you back to stage.
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Santosh Kumar Sahu. It was a wonderful session. And thank you all the paper presenters, discussants. Thank you very much. We have another parallel session starting at 5:50 to 7:20. You can join that. And our validatory section will start at 7:30 p.m. So please join. We have Dr. Viral Acharya in the validatory session, and followed by the best paper, announcement of best paper presentation. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you very much. In fact, Anand, thank you for inviting me. It was a wonderful session with both theory, empirics, monetary economics to energy, which is wide range of subjects, and lots of good presentation and participation from the entire participants. It's a wonderful event that you organized. Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me to the meeting. Yeah.
Thank you, Santosh. The pleasure is ours.
Hello, Dr. Anand.
Yeah.
Now, please join the other link. There's a link, and we have a session there.
Yeah, I have already announced.
Yeah, we are just starting.
Yeah.
You can leave this and cancel the session, and we can start that.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you all once again. The link has been provided on the chat box. You can, join directly from there.